Awesome. Hey everybody. This week we're talking to Jeff, the MicroStrategy expert. Jeff, what's going on?
Hello, hello. Happy to be here. Good to see everybody. And yeah, let's do this thing.
Yeah, I thought it would be great to just host you briefly to kind of talk about everything that's going on with MicroStrategy. Like, I feel like, this year it's just been absolutely insane, right? Like, we were just kind of talking about it. Like, everyone wishes they had bought MicroStrategy sooner, and unfortunately, everyone gets in at the price they deserve, I guess. But how do you like, ever since you initially learned about MicroStrategy and Bitcoin also in general, like, has it evolved as you expected? Has it changed over time? Like, how are you, what's been your journey so far?
Yeah, that's a great question, and nobody's asked me that yet before. And my journey has certainly evolved quite a bit, especially just following MicroStrategy and being at the knife's edge of this trade, right? I've said this multiple times. This is the most interesting story in all of corporate finance ever. Not once in history has there been a time where somebody has shifted, a corporate treasury from cash or to an alternative asset that outperforms all other assets on the planet. Right? This has never happened before, and it's incredibly interesting, and it's evolving very quickly, which is one of the reasons why we have these kind of Wednesday calls that on MSTR True North. For those that are unaware, we have weekly calls every Wednesday, and we're talking about what's going on with the trade, and what the entire market is thinking about, and how complex this trade is, right? A lot of people like to think that there's only retail in the market, but one thing that's really interesting to me is just the game theory of all the players in the entirety of the game, right? I mean, you've got so many people that are invested in MicroStrategy for very different reasons, right? You've got convertible bond holders that are arbing premium. You've got people that are like actually just looking at the premium relative to Bitcoin and moving in and out and trading it. You've got people that are retail holders that are holding it for a decade. You've got ETFs that have passive flows that are coming into it. You've got hedge fund managers that are taking a long-term bullish bet. And there's just so many players in this game, and it's a fascinating equity to watch and see how it performs relative to other equities, and thinking about what the possibility of this company is holding all of this capital and collateral, and what the possibility is with that capital and collateral. So it's a fascinating, it's certainly evolved over time. I mean, in particular, I'm astonished at their ability to raise capital. And they're currently holding significantly more Bitcoin on the balance sheet than I thought they were going to hold, like halfway through the year. Right, we're nearing 450,000 Bitcoin held on balance sheet. At the beginning of the year, there was 189,000. If you would have told me 500,000 by the end of the year, I would said 0% probability, right? So in terms of thinking how this has evolved, it certainly moved a lot faster than I imagined, and their ability to tap these different capital pools, not just the ATM, just the convertible bond market as well, is pretty fascinating. I mean, they've raised, what is it, like $15 billion in the last 50 days, which is incredible. You know how hard it is to raise $100 million, and they've done it 150 times in the last 50 days, right? Like it's just a mind-boggling number. Even trying to raise $1 billion is incredibly difficult. So just the scale of this is super fascinating.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. Like, I think even Saylor himself has probably like seen the strategy evolve, and I feel like he's probably even admitted that. It's like when he first started, buying Bitcoin, he was like, "We're going to accumulate Bitcoin," and then he realized like there's, if he can borrow a little bit of money and get this premium over the net asset value, which you guys have talked about, repeatedly. It's like then that kind of creates a whole new animal, and then add in, the ability to this unique dynamic with convertible bonds themselves. It's like he's kind of unlocked this like weird beast that's kind of in a way accelerating like hyper Bitcoinization,
Yeah,
which is just quite fascinating.
and it's really paved the path, right? They are. This is repeatable. Every other corporation in the entire world can do something similar to this. they don't have to go balls to the wall like MicroStrategy's done and go, full on convert 100% of the balance sheet over to Bitcoin. I mean, you can have a $10 billion company and put 25% of your balance sheet into Bitcoin, and you could still run a similar strategy and offer convertible debt, and the market would eat it up, right? Because you would be injecting more volatility into your equity. Now, it might not be as volatile as MicroStrategy, but the world of capital and risk return trade-offs, there's a huge variance in what people want to add to their portfolio, and these types of equities are really appealing. So it's really exciting to me. I think the next 12, 24 months will be incredibly fascinating to see how other corporations adopt this strategy. I think we're going to see 25 plus companies doing something very similar. And we're already seeing it right now, right? With Riot and Mara and, these other companies that are taking this leveraged Bitcoin equity approach, and it's paying off, right? The stock performance is undeniable, undeniable.
Yeah.
So you have to take it into consideration and quantify how that could impact your stock moving forward.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the QQQ inclusion? Like, obviously that was a huge deal. Everyone was very excited about it. What do you think is going to happen, like, when it actually gets included, and potentially like the feedback loop of like MicroStrategy, growing their market cap, then more passive flows have to allocate? Like, how big do you think this could get?
I mean, getting included in QQQ is an enormous deal, and it's an enormous deal for Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is now in QQQ, right? Like, people will say, well, Tesla holds Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Well, no, Tesla's more of an electric car. It's 99% electric car company, 1% Bitcoin. And MicroStrategy is the alternative, right? It's 99% Bitcoin, 1% software, or maybe 95.5, or whatever it may be. So this is really QQQ's adoption of Bitcoin, which is really fascinating to see. In terms of how it may impact the equity, it's so tough to say, like, in the short term, right? In the short term, it's incredibly tough to say, because in the equity market, everybody is front running everybody all the time, everywhere, in every sense of the globe, right? Like, and they're using digital algorithms to do it, and it's impossible to understand, like, short term impact. However, I think we've already seen some of the impact of QQQ within the stock price, right? I mean, the stock price has gone from, $1,000. Well, I guess let's just say $100 split adjusted to, where it's at today, 380, 390. And that's happened over the last 3 or 4 months. And so a 300% return in 3 or 4 months. So I think we're already starting to see some of that. And the reason this is so valuable and this is so important is because all of these funds that they're already included in, so like the Russell funds, total stock market weighted index funds, MSCI index, and now the QQQ, are market cap weighted index funds. And the reason that's so important is because as the market cap increases, the relative dollar flow that's coming to these these equities is increasing exponentially, not linearly. So, like, for example, I think somebody posted this on Bloomberg, right? MicroStrategy is included in QQQ with a 0.4% allocation to QQQ. So that means about $2 billion of inflows that are coming in the door for MicroStrategy. To put it in perspective, Apple is going from an 8% allocation, like 8.5% allocation, to about a 9.2% allocation. And that results in $4 billion of new capital that's coming in the door for Apple. And like, for Apple, that's no change in their business model, right? It's just the market cap changed, and that's resulting in this kind of like compounded impact where you have people that are investing in QQQ, and those new dollar flows are coming into those equities. So this is so exciting and appealing to me for MicroStrategy, because if I think Bitcoin is going up forever, then MicroStrategy's market cap is going up forever if it's a function of Bitcoin, period. And so if you think about its relativity to other equities, if I think MicroStrategy's market cap moves faster than other equities, we're going to see this kind of increasing compounding impact of capital as they get included higher up with higher market caps in these passively market cap weighted index funds.
Yeah, it's going to be insane, I think, because I was thinking about this the other day. Most companies, are actively buying back their shares. Like they're not issuing new shares; they're actively buying back, trying to make their earnings per share look like it's going up really aggressively, and also because like they don't have any crazy new highly profitable venture that they know they can raise $10 billion and then buy, whatever asset they want to buy or invest in whatever asset they want to buy. Whereas like MicroStrategy is like the most scalable business model ever. It's like, does it trade at a premium? If yes, like issue convertible notes or issue equity and buy more Bitcoin. And it's like overnight you can make, a ton of money in your BTC yield, and then the market cap can grow. So it's like this thing, it could get insane for MicroStrategy and Bitcoin.
Yeah, I completely agree. And any company that's doing stock buybacks is a bearish signal. It's telling every shareholder, I don't know what to do with this money. But what it does is it incentivizes people to buy the stock. If there's an announcement of a share buyback, you buy the stock because you know that they're going to buy it back. So that pushes, it's kind of that its own little flywheel in and of itself. Like stock buybacks are its own little flywheel. Looking back on it, right? I think Apple had a $100 billion stock buyback earlier this year, and it's going to be, I think we're going to look back on that 5-10 years from now, and it's going to be one of the worst financial moves ever. If they would have considered $10 billion of Bitcoin, like 10% of that stock buyback and bought Bitcoin, I think we'd see the equation would be significantly different.
I don't know if I've ever heard you answer this question, but how do you think about like, and obviously this is not investment advice from either of us, but how do you think about like portfolio allocation when it comes to Bitcoin and MicroStrategy? Like in my mind, you have, maybe like the most risky or aggressive plays would be like MicroStrategy calls or like the leveraged ETFs. Then you might have like a MicroStrategy position. Then you might have like a MicroStrategy covered call position. Then you might have like cold storage Bitcoin. How do you think about like allocating to like the different segments of kind of the same trade?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, none of this is financial advice. And ultimately, to understand the MicroStrategy trade, just period, I think somebody needs to go through the process of understanding how to move Bitcoin from an exchange over to cold storage. And that's kind of like step one. Do a cold storage transaction, and all of a sudden you have this like aha moment of, oh my God, this is so powerful. I think the first time I did it, I walked around the block afterwards. Like I think I held my little hardware wallet, and I was just like, oh my God. And I didn't even need my hardware wallet. I could have my money in my brain. And it was just this, completely mind bending experience. So step one, figure out Bitcoin and cold storage. I mean, if people have trapped capital in 401ks or in retirement accounts or things like that, then maybe it makes sense to have a Bitcoin ETF allocation. In terms of like percentages or proportions, I think it's all dependent on timing, risk tolerance, understanding like how much do you want to pay attention to this trade, right? Like I wouldn't recommend call options for anybody that's like doesn't know what's going on in the trade. If you're willing to pay attention and put time and devote time and effort into it, then it might be worth considering options like on a long-term basis. And in terms of relative proportions, it really kind of depends. But I mean, for me personally, like I've got trapped collateral, or I've got trapped capital in retirement accounts, and I wasn't able to buy Bitcoin, and there were no ETFs available at the time, and I wanted Bitcoin exposure, and I didn't want to, pull it out and take a tax hit. So I figured, okay, how can I get Bitcoin exposure? Also, my horizon's huge, right? I've got however many, a huge horizon until I'm able to tap into that capital without taking a penalty. So I took a leveraged position in those accounts towards MicroStrategy, and ultimately, yeah, it just varies for everybody. And you asked about the covered call thing. And I think this is an interesting conversation because there's so much power in the logistics and the architecture of MicroStrategy with covered calls. What I mean by that is, and I think this could fundamentally change what a future bear market looks like for Bitcoin. And the reason for that is the plumbing is in place for people to earn a yield on their Bitcoin holdings or their Bitcoin proxies in perpetuity and into the future. And it's amplified with MicroStrategy's options. So what I mean by that is if you're holding a big, pile of MicroStrategy shares in a technical bear market, you could be, instead of selling the shares outright, like instead of, freaking out and going like, oh my God, I need to pull money off the table and selling the shares like you would have to do with Bitcoin, you have the opportunity to sell covered calls and generate income and yield in the interim if you have a strategy where you think Bitcoin's moving in one direction or another. And that ability to generate income while not selling your holdings is super powerful. And the reason it's powerful is because the premium and the volatility on the MicroStrategy stock is so high. The premiums are really high for options that are really far out of the money. So like you can sell a covered call option 100% out of the money, meaning that the stock would need to appreciate 100%. So let's just say going from 400 to 800, and you could sell covered calls on 10% of your stack 100% out of the money and generate income. And if the price goes to 800, then the rest of your portfolio is also at 800, and 10% of your shares are getting called away 100% higher than what it's at today. So it's technically a bearish position, but it's a way to generate a yield and think about strategically taking money off the table if you needed to. So I feel comfortable doing all of this and holding MicroStrategy because I have Bitcoin and cold storage too. So Bitcoin and cold storage is like my safest asset that I have. And, if there's a big red day in MicroStrategy, I don't care because I hold Bitcoin. and that's kind of how I view it. I know there's been a lot of noise in the market just in the last week about, Michael Saylor's hitting the ATM too hard and, all this stuff. It's like, he doesn't care about that. Like, he doesn't care about MNAV. Like, that's not a KPI. Like, adding Bitcoin on balance sheet is the KPI. It's like, acquire as much Bitcoin as humanly possible. And, so that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, you made some great points, and I obviously fully agree with the idea that your cold storage Bitcoin position is vastly more important than MicroStrategy. I mean, MicroStrategy is a great trade, and it's done very well, and it could continue to do very well. But like the core position for most people should definitely just be like Bitcoin, cold storage, maybe with Unchained, hopefully. But I definitely agree with that. It's you can speculate with some portion of your wealth and invest, which is exactly what you're doing when you buy equities. Yeah. But nothing replaces like cold storage Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Is like MicroStrategy is an equity, and it's not Bitcoin. And a lot of people ask, like, okay, well, what does MicroStrategy look like in the long term if we're in a fully Bitcoin denominated world? And ultimately, I like to point out that there's a very high likelihood that there's going to be an equity market in a Bitcoin denominated world, and the equity market, even if it's priced in Bitcoin, is going to trade at a multiple of whatever its underlying like Bitcoin or asset holding is. Like, there are going to be other things in the world that hold value beyond Bitcoin, right? Like, homes are going to hold value, commodities are going to hold value, equities are going to hold value for different reasons. And a lot of people think that if we were in a hyper Bitcoinized world, MicroStrategy's valuation just drops to whatever their Bitcoin holdings are. And that's just totally not true. Like if the equity market structure maintains, we're going to see equities also hold multiples of whatever their underlying assets are for reason X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I also think that, if a lot of people actually start, trading equities in terms of Bitcoin or like directly for Bitcoin, like we'll all probably be all right at that point.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
right.
MicroStrategy will be pretty high.
Yeah, if you're thinking about that now and you're holding either of those positions, yeah, you probably are very okay.
What do
point.
you I kind of want to like dive a little bit more into like the volatility side of things. Like you talked about how like kind of that how you could do covered calls
Yeah.
because the options are so valuable,
Mm-hmm.
because MicroStrategy and Bitcoin is so valuable. Can you kind of like dive a little bit deeper into that and maybe also touch into like convertible notes and like how they're able to do that?
Yeah, volatility is vitality. So there's a couple things happening in my opinion, and honestly, Jeff Park is the one to talk about. Getting into the really, like, if you want to get into the really nitty gritty, you could talk to Jeff about this. But there's a few things that are happening in my opinion that make MicroStrategy more volatile than Bitcoin. So one, it is an equity, and the architecture of the equity market is just fundamentally different than the Bitcoin market, right? MicroStrategy shares that are trading at the margin are more rare than like Bitcoin that's trading at the margin. That's kind of one way I could think about it. So we've got volatility from just architecture, right? Like architecture and the different asset type. That leads to volatility. The second thing that leads to volatility is the fact that these convertible bonds do exist. So the convertible bonds and what MicroStrategy is doing with the convertible bonds is they're effectively like stepping down the volatility of Bitcoin and offering a product to the market that's Bitcoin exposure. Let's just call it Bitcoin Light. Shout out Mason who termed that. We're going to call it Bitcoin Light. And your Bitcoin Light, your convertible debt product, it truncates the upside of Bitcoin, but also truncates the downside. So this product, this convertible debt product, it acts like debt to the downside, acts like equity to the upside. And the reason it's truncating the upside is because the convertible debt itself has an option premium. So there's got optionality. So it doesn't convert into equity until you get 50% over, whatever the current equity price is. So who takes the excess volatility or the excess return, and who takes the excess downside? It's the equity holders. So you've got this convertible debt product that truncates the upside, it truncates the downside, and that those two pieces flow to the equity holders, which adds excess volatility. So you're basically taking the excess volatility of this convertible debt product that they just created, and you're giving that to the equity holders. So you have the Bitcoin itself held on balance sheet, which is increasing incredibly rapidly. And a lot of the Bitcoin that's been added to the balance sheet very recently has just been from the ATM, which has not necessarily increased the volatility of the equity because there is no excess volatility. Like you're selling shares at the market, you're generating that cash and buying Bitcoin, and you're slamming it into the balance sheet. And that's permanent capital. And so that a lot of that excess volatility is coming from these alternative products where you're chopping off the risk of the upside and the downside.
Yeah, it's almost like these convertible notes and then also like a MicroStrategy covered call position are kind of like Bitcoin with training wheels. Like, if you're scared of the downside for whatever reason, which is fair because in the short term, Bitcoin is extremely volatile. You buy a convertible note and recognize that most likely, unless Bitcoin literally goes to zero, like Bitcoin could fall 80%, you're going to get 100% of your money back.
Yeah.
And then it's like the covered calls that could be like your traditional financial advisor that's like, never touch Bitcoin. It provides no cash flows whatsoever. Well, now like you can, sell excess volatility and earn a little bit of cash flow by holding some sort of Bitcoin derivative position, MicroStrategy. So it's like, it's kind of like killing some arguments for, what traditional financial analysts might be saying about Bitcoin and MicroStrategy. And it kind of forces people that are on the fence, like, oh, here, I'll dip my toe in the water here, but I
Yeah.
want these like training wheels or these gutters
Right.
around my position.
Right. And I think the mantra for holding MicroStrategy is very similar to the mantra for holding Bitcoin. Like, if you don't plan on holding this for 4+ years, you may not have any business being here. And that's very similar with Bitcoin, right? Like, you could buy Bitcoin at like, I'm buying the top forever, right? Like, what if it's 110,000, I'm buying. If it's 120,000, I'm buying. And I'm doing the same with MicroStrategy, but like, I'm also taking this long-term view of, I think MicroStrategy is a $10 trillion company in 10 years. And I say this a lot. It's like, I don't want to be that grandpa or that like old curmudgeon uncle that says that they could have bought Apple at 25 cents. You know, like, everybody's got that relative that's told you some stupid equity story. And it's like, this is one of those circumstances where it's like, you have the opportunity to potentially hold an asset that goes to $10 trillion, just understanding the structure of the equity market. And I want to be a part of that ride. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to sell Apple at $100 billion market cap and it goes to 3 trillion. I don't want to sell Microsoft at $100 billion market cap, goes to 3 trillion. You know, like, this is one of those systemic situations, which, like, if you look at where MicroStrategy is trading, the trading volume daily, has been like top 3 equity, maybe top 4 equity on average for the last 2 months. And it's not even included in the S&P 500. And all of the other equities are already included in the S&P 500. And the S&P 500 adds like incredible volume to your stock because the S&P 500 is trading all the time. So yeah, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah, I have seen like stats like that showing that MicroStrategy is like the volume in the stock itself has just been out of control. Have you like, do you know why that's the case? Like, obviously I would say like volatility makes it the case. And I'm sure there's people trying to like arbitrage the difference between like IBIT and like MicroStrategy and Bitcoin itself and things like that.
Yeah.
Is that the main reason why, or do you have any other ideas?
Yeah. I mean, they've got $7 billion of convertible debt outstanding. And that convertible debt is potentially arbing, you know, the price up and down. So like, as the price goes up, they may short it. As the price goes down, they may, you know, long it. And there's, you know, all this stuff that you could do intraday, you could do it digitally. And I think there's a lot of things that are happening digitally, electronically, with algorithms and, you know, all of these things that is adding to that increased volume. You've got MicroStrategy included in, like, I don't know the exact number. There are multiple different sources on this, but over 150 index ETFs. And you know, some of them are Bitcoin correlated, some of them are, you know, MSCI index and all these other things. And you've got these large capital. You've got large capital that's kind of trading in and out based on, you know, dollar flows and volume to each one of these individual ETF products as well. So I think it's a little bit of everything. You also have the ATM. Right, Saylor is selling shares. So they've announced the $21 billion capital plan. I think they've used 13 billion of it so far. So I mean, that adds to volume as well, but only a pittance relative to like total volume, probably like 3-5%.
Yeah, you brought up earlier about how you think MicroStrategy could eventually become a $10 trillion company. I agree. I definitely think that's possible. Do you think it's possible that it will become like the largest company in the world?
Yeah, that's been my thesis for over a year and a half, 2 years. When we did our first Quant Bros episode, and Quant Bros, like, this is where we outlined our thesis back in February, just outlining, you know, thinking about how this equity trades and, you know, like the Bitcoin that sits on balance sheet and like where it could potentially go. MicroStrategy was trading at I think like $60 or $50 split adjusted to where it's trading today. And my partner that I was, you know, doing that with, he said, I wanted to make the title of the of the show, can MicroStrategy hit $100,000? And he said, no, don't do it. Like, people are going to freak out. Like, if you say $3 trillion market cap, people are going to freak out. So we shrunk it down and said, can MicroStrategy hit $10,000, which was, I don't know, like a,
Yeah, it's funny because like I think the problem is like just in general, like not really a problem, but it's kind of funny. Like with Bitcoin and MicroStrategy in general, is like you look genius for a very short amount of time, and then like 3 years straight, you look like a complete idiot.
Yeah.
And it's like that's just kind of like the brutal nature of this space.
Yeah.
And you know, it is what it is, but it's like it goes back to what you were saying. Like if you are like messing around with Bitcoin, like Bitcoin is long-term savings technology. In my opinion, MicroStrategy is like a conservatively leveraged Bitcoin position.
Yeah.
And it's like this is going to be, you know, it requires long-term, you know, planning and long-term holding for this to be realized without luck. Like obviously, you know, who knows what's going to happen in the next 3 months, as you pointed out. Like Bitcoin could go to 200,000, Bitcoin could go back to 80,000 or lower. 58. Like who knows? Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's going to be crazy to see how it plays out, but it's definitely a long-term tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think, so it's crazy. I work in traditional finance, and I speak to people in traditional finance about, you know, Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, what they're doing all the time. And it's funny because, you know, we'll talk about these reinsurance entities, and these reinsurance entities have $10 billion of capital. And that's a lot in the reinsurance world. And then I mentioned that MicroStrategy is holding $40 billion of Bitcoin, and then they laugh and they dismiss it. And it's one of those things. It's like, did you mishear me? You know, I said 40 billion, like 4 times the amount of like most of the reinsurance entities that like we work with. And it's interesting the feedback that you get, and the folks that are ignoring like the 7th largest asset on the planet. You know, just past silver, just past Saudi Aramco, and now it's the 7th largest trading asset in the world, about $2 trillion. And the lack of curiosity in some of these marketplaces is really interesting. And it's an unwillingness to kind of like break reality or perceptions of, you know, monetary instruments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I've always kind of wondered, like, you know, living through some of the cycles, it's like every cycle we get like a marginally more group, you know, more individuals that like buy into the idea of Bitcoin as good money or long-term money. And it's like at some point it feels like we're potentially going to reach some sort of like tipping point where like the true herd is going to come in and like really, you know, take things to the next level. And like it feels like, you know, I don't know if that's going to be this cycle or the next cycle or a following cycle, but it feels like it's possible that it could be this cycle. Like I know a lot of people are dismissive, but like if enough, you know, intelligent people capitulate, like BlackRock, you know, launching a IBIT, or, you know, Apple potentially in the future maybe buying a lot of Bitcoin, or another like very blue chip, you know, intelligent, you know, US equity, or even the National Strategic Reserve. Like there, to me, there might be like some sort of domino that falls, that there's just going to be a massive herd of people that come into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, you know, it's, I kind of want to hit on this point, and I wrote it down. Like, right now, and just focusing on MicroStrategy, and then we'll zoom out. Like, and I say this a lot on my Twitter, is that bewilderment is intensifying. Okay, especially with MicroStrategy, and it's really interesting, the concept of who's bewildered and why they're bewildered, right? Like you've got this camp of Bitcoiners that understands Bitcoin, but they don't understand financial leverage and corporate infrastructure. And then and so that's the Bitcoiner camp. And then you've got this traditional finance camp that understands financial leverage, but doesn't understand Bitcoin. And it's like right now, anybody that's holding MicroStrategy is really like straddling this, like both of these bewildered parties. You know, the Bitcoin party is like, oh, this is a Ponzi scheme. And the TradFi party is like, oh, this is a Ponzi scheme, for different reasons, which is like crazy to conceptualize. And so then you have, you know, MicroStrategy that sits in the middle of people that understand like traditional finance ecosystem and structure, and then those that understand Bitcoin. And both of those parties are going to merge. They're going to get closer together as the TradFi party understands Bitcoin, and as the Bitcoin party understands like financial ecosystems and structure and the traditional financial markets. So that's kind of point one I wanted to hit on, which I think is really interesting and valuable to understand the entire market. And then in terms of like dominoes falling, right, it just takes a couple people from this traditional finance ecosphere to go, wait, hold on a minute. This is collateral. And I think most of the traditional financial market doesn't understand that Bitcoin is collateral. And that's a big issue, right? Like most of them just just think this is tulips. And the reason that Bitcoin is collateral is so important is because it removes a lot of the trust out of the existing financial ecosystem. So like most of the financial markets, how they exist right now are still they're very trust-based. At least the market that I work in, like the reinsurance market, you've got letters of credit flying around everywhere. Okay. And I know this works in the banking system as well. And a letter of credit is really just a bank saying like, yes, you're good for the money. That's all it is. It's just like a legal contract where it says like, but yes, this person's good for the money. You can transact. Like if there's a loss or a payment that needs to happen, they've got enough money in their bank that, they could send money to X person. So now imagine a financial world where that trust component is just removed. Like you don't need to trust anybody anymore because you can literally see your money and you can write it in code. And you can have in like an escrow ecosystem written in code where you can post your collateral for, X transaction and earn a yield in the interim while you're posting your collateral. And once the transaction's over, like if the collateral needs to move to this person, great, it's written in code. If it goes back to the original holder, then that's written in code. And Bitcoin is the best collateral on the planet. Like you can see it, you can program it. And a lot of the traditional financial market, it's going to take them decades to figure it out. People are going to have to die off, and younger, like computer science geeks, are going to come in the door and start writing all this code and like understanding how these transactions are working. So, and it's also going to require like a little bit less volatility in the price of Bitcoin, and these like the evolution of combined and wrapped products where you've got, maybe it's Bitcoin and treasuries, or like Bitcoin and maybe it's MicroStrategy convertible debt, and like these types of things. So once this side of the equation starts to understand that Bitcoin is collateral and it's not tulip bulbs, they will start to get it. And so I think that's one of the dominoes that will start to fall, and that'll be, it could be a $10 billion company. It could be a $5 billion company. And, we're going to see a lot of these smaller companies where it's like adapt or die, buy Bitcoin, put it on your balance sheet, or die. And that's going to be inevitable. But to your point, it may be a bigger wave in the market if we see a $100 billion company or $200 billion company take an aggressive approach here. And it's possible.
Yep. I definitely think it's possible. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's, almost inevitable that eventually will happen. It's just a matter of time. It is also interesting thinking about like how to frame Bitcoin too, because like, I use the term money a lot, and like, I think that's a decent term, but it's not perfect by any means. And like, I like how you use the word like collateral, like how Saylor uses the word like digital capital. It's kind of like abstract, but it makes sense. And it's, in some way, it's almost like humans have like never discovered money before, and that we have this like new tool that may not be like, money may not be the best word, but maybe collateral or digital capital is a better word. And it's like we're all just trying to like figure out what this thing is, and at the end of the day, it's really just like amazing long-term savings technology that's going to like reprice everything. And so like it's going to be insane, like, see how it plays out, but also like what we even call it in the future, because it's almost like we've never discovered this thing before, and we're trying to like figure out what it is, and we just know it's awesome.
Right. Yeah. Digital property, like you've never once been able to own a piece of a network, right? Like when the internet came out, everybody was buying domain names like crazy, and which is great, but domain names are infinite. So the real beauty of Satoshi and Bitcoin is that you created scarcity on the internet, true scarcity on the internet. And you've never once been able to hold a piece of a network like that, right? Like Facebook or like MySpace. Like you couldn't own, like, or you could buy a piece of like Meta stock, but you don't actually own a piece of the network itself, you know. And this is the first time you've been able to own a piece of a network, and that the internet native component is the most fascinating part, right? It's like unstoppable, and that ownership can be used as collateral or posted as collateral in any of these types of transactions. So yeah, the way we talk about it and the verbiage is going to evolve, and I'm really excited for it. I'm here for it. I'm excited to work on it, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about the future for this type of stuff.
Absolutely. Maybe one of the last questions, and we can start to close it out. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, in my opinion, could be like one of those dominoes that we're talking about that really, gets people that have been on the fence or just not paying attention to Bitcoin seriously, gets them really paying attention to Bitcoin. What are your general thoughts on the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve?
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. Right? I think it's a no-brainer for the US government. Even if it fails and goes to zero, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, we're 36 trillion, maybe it's $37 trillion in debt, right? Like, what is that? That's 12 apples. Like, where do we find 12 apples? Right? Like, it's not, Elon Musk could come in and like, slash half of the government. You're still not going to find 12 apples, right? Like, you're not going to slash the military, which is one of our biggest spends. And, those types of things are, it's inevitable that number continues to grow. So in thinking about historical money and how countries have like accumulated and acquired money, if you think about who the largest holder of gold is in the world, it's the US, and they've got like 8,000 tons. They've got like 3 times more the next closest country. And at the end of the day, that's literally just power, right? Like, even if it's underground in Fort Knox and nobody's ever seen it in the last 40 years or whatever, it's like just understanding that they have it is power. And that we're approaching a very similar situation with Bitcoin, where it's a no-brainer to add it to your balance sheet. So let's just say they bought 500. Let's just make it easy numbers, like a million Bitcoin, and it costs $100 billion, or let's just say it costs $200 billion. $200 billion relative to 38 trillion is a tiny number, right? Like, it was at less than 1%. It's less than 1%. Right? Like, I don't know what we've spent on sending aid to these other countries in war, and you start to make some of these arguments, and you think about the relative nature and size of some of these other things that like the government has spent money on, and you kind of think about it as like, okay, well, you could buy all of this asset and just hold it on your balance sheet just in case, right? Like, even if it goes to zero, it's probably worth the risk of holding it. And now you have that power to portray to other countries, and you say like, okay, don't mess with us, because we've got all this power too, right? We've got all the gold power, we've got all the network internet native money power, and we've got all the, we are the global dominant US fiat currency. So to me it seems like a no-brainer. And that's not me just like bullishly saying like, I think the government should buy Bitcoin because it's good for me. Like, if, in thinking of the game theory, if I were at the helm, I would want to own more of the most scarce assets on the planet, whether that be like platinum or, even other commodities, right? Like, us holding oil and how we control our oil supply is also power. And this is just another power vector, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, this is by far the biggest domino that could happen. I mean, if the United States literally passes a bill that says we're going to acquire 1 million Bitcoins, like, everyone is going to start paying attention. Yeah. It's going it's going to be insane.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was thinking about is like, you know, we don't know for sure if Trump or Senator Lummis are actually going to be able to get that Bitcoin Act
Right.
of 2024 passed. It seems, from what I've heard, at least, like it seems likely that there will be some sort of executive order on the first day where it's like moving the existing Bitcoin into a strategic reserve and calling it that.
Yeah.
But I also think that like just the talk of this coming from the United States of America, from actual sitting US senators and,
Yeah.
you know, a president that like, you know, is kind of willing to go against the grain and do things that are a little unique. People like other countries have to be paying attention to
Right.
this, and they
Right.
have to be like considering and looking into maybe we need some Bitcoin too.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with Bitcoin is because of the game theory. Uh, I game theory was one of my favorite classes that I took in college, and if I tell people it fundamentally changed my life and how I viewed the world. Like I would walk out of class and you start looking around at the world and you're like, oh my God, there's game theory everywhere. Like it's happening everywhere. And Bitcoin is like the ultimate game theory equation where you do think about these components of, you know, like who has incentive to hold, why do they have incentive to hold, and it turns out everybody has incentive to hold. And when I made that realization that everybody has incentive to hold and there's no incentive to like try and destroy it, I like I was in my backyard and I audibly started laughing, and my wife was like, what is going on? And I'm like, oh my God, everybody has incentive to hold. You know, and I just you know, worked my way through the entire equation of the game theory. So yeah, and there's also in terms of like thinking of the dominoes, right? There's also this nominal bias component, and I think we passed one milestone by hitting $100,000, where people, you know, that's going to make a marginal increase in the number of people that care about Bitcoin, because we passed this like 100,000 hurdle, and people are like, wait, hold on, why is it at 100,000? And you've got more people that are going to look at it. And to me, that one of the next hurdles, like let's just take strategic Bitcoin reserve out of the picture. One of the next hurdles is 450,000, 400,000, 450,000, where people are going to realize that it's worth more than a home or the average home price in America. And I think that's another like, okay, does it make sense that I have 10 homes in a real estate portfolio that have property tax and, you know, decay and, you know, all of these maintenance fees and costs and everything? Or does it make more sense to hold a more scarce asset where it doesn't have any maintenance fees or property tax or any of this, like any of these like headache components? And I think we'll see an even increase, like a larger marginal proportion of people that will reevaluate their existing assets and what they hold at that kind of nominal figure. So yeah, I mean, there's and that could be, it could be pushed there from the government too, right? So like if the government, even if the government buys, well, I don't know how much they hold. I think it's like 200,000 in the
Something
like
like
the
that, yeah.
existing that they hold in custody. If they bought another 200,000, all of a sudden, you know, the price starts to rise there too, and that may be what pushes us to those nominal figures or those nominal locations. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's the most interesting story in all of finance, and like the game theory is just so incredibly fun.
Yeah, absolutely. The topic of game theory reminded me of like Bitstein's meme that he's posted before, where he's like, Bitcoin, the only winning move is to play.
Yeah,
And it's like
yeah,
that's kind of how it works.
yeah,
It's like once you
yeah,
figure this out, you're like, oh gosh, I need to get some and save some before everyone else does.
yeah. And like the math isn't hard either. Like you just do, okay, 21 million divided by 8 billion. 8 billion people on the planet, and you're like, okay, what's that cost today? And it's like, I don't know, $100, or maybe not. It's not even that. It's like less than $100 maybe. So, or even if you simplify that and you just say 21 million divided by 300 million people in the United States, like even if you just zoomed in on just the US, which it's not, it's a globally liquid asset, you start to realize like, oh, I can have a lot more of this than a lot of people if this were distributed evenly for a very little amount of money. And that is to me, that was also a no-brainer to me. That was the math I did in 2020 when it really started to like click for me. I was like, I can't not buy this.
Yeah.
I can't not buy it. Like, to your point, it's like that. Like, the only thing is to play, and I can't not buy it and not hold it.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
yeah, it's just so fun.
Totally agree. Jeff, I feel like we could do this for hours, but we probably got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
We'll have to do this again at some point. Any final closing thoughts?
No, I think we've got a really exciting future. The next 12 months are going to be incredibly exciting. I think MicroStrategy is going to add more Bitcoin to the balance sheet. I wouldn't be surprised if mid 2025 we see them with 600,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet, 500, 600,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And, we see Bitcoin at 200,000. So yeah, I'm excited about the future, and it's helpful when you're talking to people to think about the collateral nature of Bitcoin and like using it as collateral. And that's my only ending thought.
I love it. Well, thanks, Jeff, for coming on. This has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.